Well, greetings. This is Phil Gruber with Matt Anderson, and this is the Thursday edition of Cosmic Conversations. We have an amazing surprise guest with us tonight. We got Quantum Doug Matzke with us. So let's welcome Quantum Doug and thank you all for joining our podcast. All right, Doug, good to see you.
Yeah, hey, thanks. I'm going to switch my view here, so I'm a speaker view here, multi-view speaker here, just for my own purposes.
Yeah, you're,
So,
you're
and if
coming
you,
in loud and clear. So
yeah, great. And so,
cheers, Doug.
hey, thanks. I really appreciate you stepping in and taking, from Sheila to help run these meetings, and you and Brenda. Is it Brenda? Yeah.
Brenda,
What?
Glenda,
Glenda,
Glenda.
Glenda,
Okay, Glenda. Yeah, there
Glenda
it
the Good
is. I knew I
Witch.
had it right. As an engineer, I always have to double check all my names, right? So,
That's right.
and so yeah, I'm Quantum Doug, and the reason I'm Quantum Doug is because I think everything's quantum ultimately, and I have a PhD in quantum computing from 22 years ago already, 2002. So I'm a techie, but I'm a nerd and interested in metaphysics. So that's combination. And I've been guided for 30 years, more than 30 years, to look at how information is related to mysticism, to metaphysics. And so I said, maybe I could. So I hosted a conference on physics and computing in 92 and then again in 94. And people like Ralph Landauer came, was my keynote speaker, and he was saying information is physical. And so I took that seriously and saying, well, if information is physical, then maybe we can prove that the mind can't be the brain. You know what I'm saying? That the mind has informational behaviors that don't match what the brain architecture is. Because I'm a computer architect and software guy. So the brain to me is just the wrong architecture to support anything like intelligence, even, and metaphysics. It has all the wrong properties. So I've been working on that for that long, and back 5 years ago, I released this book called Deep Reality, and it was co-written by Dr. Bill Tiller, who's now deceased. And it basically takes all of what I was thinking about for 30 years and puts it in a book form. And maybe it's a little heavy mathematics, but because I wanted to kind of like, if I was only going to write one book, I would want to be able to say what I wanted to say. Okay. But the last 2/3 of the book doesn't have a lot of math in it. So for those who are interested in learning how I think, and it's all about the requirements for essentially mind that supports spiritually transformative experiences, right? And what is the representation for mind to support that? And I believe that it's information. And so my PhD was in information. It says, look, if we start with just bits, nothing else but bits, can we make it compatible with physics such that we can say something about how information and maybe thought and mind are related to physics, right? Because it would be a requirement to do that. And so I worked on a thing I now call bit physics, and that was my PhD. And I basically showed that if you just start with bits in a certain mathematical representation that's using vectors like we do in quantum computing, that kind of math, then you could get quantum computing out of bits. In other words, you don't start with quantum computing, you start with bits. Okay. And so if you go look at some of my other slides out there, my talks, I did a talk with Sheila back 4 or 5 months ago. You can see her slides that I gave her. So those, and I have those available. I can bring them up if I need to. But basically, think of these little bits as the smallest discrete unit of distinction that you can have. A bit is just a distinction. It says I know the difference between heads or tails, or yes or no, or true or false. That's what a distinction is, and that's the minimum amount of something. So it's sort of like electron is the smallest amount of charge, right? A photon is the smallest amount of electromagnetic potential, right? That's a photon. Well, a bit is equivalent to that. And John Wheeler came along with that idea, and he says, it from bit, everything is made from bits. And he said that is because if you throw a bit into a black hole, that's the smallest impact you can make to a black hole. It's Planck area on the side. So somehow bits are physical enough in black holes that they show up as a Planck scale area on the surface of a black hole. And so it's physics, if we could talk about bits in that context. And so the question is, do we have a mathematical way of talking about bits that's compatible with physics? And so that's what I did for my PhD. And that's 22 years ago, almost 30 years ago that I've been working on this. But it's also compatible with Landauer's principle, which says if you have a bit and you throw it into a black hole, you can't ignore that bit is encoded in there because it took energy to encode that information. So you have to compensate. In order to be compatible with entropy, you can't ignore that information, right? You have to account for it, and that's the it from bit that Wheeler was talking about. Okay, so all these famous people have been thinking about this stuff, grand thoughts about this for a very long time, and I just said, well, let's take it seriously. And so I've been working on this, wrote the book, give talks about it all the time. And I basically say, look, the universe is like a simulation, but it's a simulator that runs even quantum computing. It's even more primitive than quantum computing. And people go say, oh, quantum computing is the all end all of defining consciousness and intelligence and all this stuff, right? But if there's something below that, that's the layer I'm working at, this bit structure. And it turns out that these bits are their own little dimensions. One way to think about it. And they all are 90 degrees to all others. So if you have a 100-dimensional space, they are any pair you pick is 90 degrees to any other two. So you can't compress out a 100-dimensional space if there are 100 orthonormal dimensions. You can't compress that out, okay? So that is a force of nature to have those dimensions there. It's the infrastructure for the universe to have that property of that mathematical properties, okay? And so I now realize that that's the root of physicality in the universe. There are some people, and some of the recent talks I've given says, look, if you have a 6-dimensional space, and I've taken the 6-dimensional space, you can create all the particles in physics, all the quarks and electrons and neutrinos, okay? And so a 6-dimensional space, again, you can't compress out those 6 dimensions into a 3-dimensional space because you won't have a space big enough to have all the topological constraints that you need to describe all these particles and antiparticles, right? You need room to put all that representation so they all have a unique representation in this math. And so I realized finally that these bits are the physical nature of the universe. Looks like math, but it's really the dimensions behind the math that's the physical nature of this. So, and why am I telling it to this group of these ideas is because if the universe is an infinite dimensional space, that is the simulator that runs the universe in it. Okay? And it's powerful enough to simulate the entire universe, and it's informational, and so it represents mind too, and metaphysics. So this is the big idea I've been working on for 30 years, and I've been getting a lot of intuition about this, and I wasn't always sure where the intuition was coming from, but it's just like it was claircognizant. I would just know that I knew stuff that I didn't know how I knew. Even when I wrote the book, I would only write it if I was not trying to force it, but if I was inspired. And it took me 5 years to write it, but yet I was inspired. Well, it turns out that I was inspired for a reason, as it turns out. In March, I said, I really have to come up with a better name than just hyperbits because it sounds too technical for people. So I said, well, it's the essence of existence in the universe. These little 1-bit computer little computers that are each their own little computer, and they combine to form 2-bit computers and 3-bit computers. And so the whole universe is structured out of these topology, like little molecules, a little tinker toy universe that runs the simulation of the universe. So I said, well, I need something it's the existence behind the universe. So I said, why not call it Existon? The essence, the primitive particle of existence. And some people would say, well, it looks like reductionist theory taken to the extreme, Doug. Yes, but we found that when you take reductionist theory to the extreme, you got quantum computing, quantum, right? Well, I took it even further, and I said to this, reductionist to the extreme, where I was using these distinctions and these little 1-bit dimensions, and they're actually their own little universes, each one, because they completely are independent of anything else. Okay, and so these little universes create to form our universe. Essentially, they're bubbling together to form a universe. Think of it as literally soap bubbles combining together and forming different structures, right? So when I came up with the name Existons, one of our people from Cosmic Conversations that I met at Cosmic Conversations is a woman named Fallon Taylor. And I was connecting with her after one of the Cosmic Conversations and talking about Existons. By the way, this all happened in March, end of March. And I said, I came up with this new name Existons for what I'm working. And she says, the Existons like your new name. I'm going, what? It turns out she has been tapping in to Existons her whole life also, for at least 30 years. And I've been talking to Existons for 30 years in an intuitive sense. And once we got a name of them and started describing what they were, they responded in kind as a telepathic message to Fallon, because she could talk to them. She's been talking to her whole life. And she said, we like your new name. Yes, we are the discrete unit of consciousness in the universe also. So not only are they the discrete unit of physicality in the universe, but they're also the discrete unit of consciousness in the universe, which is just no wonder I've been getting so intuitive stuff about this all along. And then they proceeded to give her a message. They say, yes, we've been talking to Doug all this time intuitively, and that's where I've been getting it from. Sort of, it's like they're my channel. They're my spirit guides, essentially, for me. They're part of my spirit guides. And she says, and we like having a keyboard. Fallon is now the keyboard that they can send messages to me, not only yes and no questions, but like a channel would, but she can get other insights too from them. Like she drew a picture of one of them, which was basically 2 existons together forming a qubit. She calls that quantum indigo. Okay. And the quantum indigo is like a spokesperson for the existons for us. So we have sort of a name to talk to them about. And now she has another one, which is an E-bit, and she calls it violet E-bit is the name of this E-bit. And so here it makes sense that if they're a primordial consciousness at this very fine-grained layer in the universe, that everything would be built out of this, including qubits, qtrits, which are photons, E-bits, which are quantum entanglement. All the particles in the standard model are built out of this because they're made out of these dimensions. Every one of these dimensions is its own little self-aware dimension. And there's mathematical properties that you could talk about that says that they square to themselves. If you square one of these states to itself, you get the state back, so it persists. So they can be self-aware and be interacting with themselves and stable. It's called idempotent behavior. So here my nerdness is taking too much of this conversation today, but it's important to say, okay, here's a mathematical model that has legs to it, and it's also consciousness. So imagine that you had source. People say they have a near-death experience. What do they have? I have a slide, but I can describe it pretty easily. They see this infinite bright sun, and they call it source or God, right? Whatever they call it. And they're seeing it. It's like this bright thing. It doesn't blind them, and it's not hot. But this radiance that comes out of it is love, they say, right? Well, what is that radiance? What is that? As an engineer, I wanted to say, what is that representation for that? Those little beams of coming from God. Well, turns out they're existons. God is nothing more than the sum of all existons, or existons are created by God, and that's its, think of its magic, if you want it, or its pixie dust of God. It has to have some representation to do it with, because otherwise it's pure magic. You can't have science. Either it's magic or science, or the magic is science, just that we don't understand it. So I think I'm tapping into the primordial intelligence of the universe that everything is made out of, including God. All the fact that everything is conscious is called panpsychism. Okay. Some people say, well, there's idealism too, but idealism says that's all there is consciousness. I'm saying, no, that's not quite right. Panpsychism says everything's conscious, but there's the physical aspects of the universe too, as well as the conscious aspects of it. So it's this balance again between that. Okay. So these are the things that I've been talking about and thinking about and intuiting about. And then because of all this, I'm going to write another book that includes Existons. My first book is perfectly okay to read. It's just every time you see hyperbits, you got to go, oh, that's Existons. And I want to actually have another book that says that, so that people understand how this is all connected. So, and talk about mathematical panpsychism as well. So I've given a bunch of talks out there. Some are more technical, some are less technical, some have slides, some don't. So go, and I made it easy for people to go find it. You can either go to Quantum Doug, all of them are listed there, all my talks, including Sheila's talks that I gave with Sheila a couple months ago. But also, and all the slides are there that I'm talking about. So the slides I'm talking about are all in the talk with Sheila. So go find Sheila's talk that I did with her. And it's listed there. But I also have made a domain called existons.one.one. Okay. And so that's just all the Existon talks listed there. So you can go see them there. But the more I introduce the idea of existons to people, especially people who are psychic, they all of a sudden realize they can tap in to this my primordial level of intelligence and consciousness directly themselves. Like they can channel existons too. And I have 3 or 4 people now that I've connected to that can say, oh yeah, I can tap into them, and they're giving me messages too. And so there's an artist out there, Melchizedek is her last name. I forget her. I'm blocking on her first name. It begins with A. And there's a link there, and there's a YouTube video that she did. She was getting light language glyphs from them, like a light language from the existons. So basically, my goal is to start channeling them more directly rather than intuitively, right? I mean, I've been doing it intuitively, and they're giving me both science and spiritual ideas, right? And so I'm trying to work on both of them. And that's what I'm trying to work on for my new book, is the balance between those two. And so one of the big outcomes of all of this is that consciousness is not emergent. Consciousness is built in down at the Planck scale, at this below the Planck scale, at this mathematical bit physics level. And so you don't have to worry about consciousness being emergent anymore. It's not. It's everything is conscious. Panpsychism, everything is conscious. Okay. And so that's a big thing, because now you can just take that off the table, and so it's the hard problem of consciousness solved. Where if you don't have consciousness and all of a sudden you do have consciousness, how is that possible? You don't have to worry about the hard problem of consciousness anymore, because the hard problem of consciousness is solved because it's built in at this level. And if it wasn't that way, we wouldn't have all the behaviors we see in near-death experiences, and people can directly interact with matter and space and time. So what is emergent then, if you have this? All of matter, space and time are emergent, which you would have if you have a simulation hypothesis of the world, of the universe, right? And so all of that's intelligent too. So people can actually interact with space-time. And so anything that's built out of those particles, which is all chemistry, all biology, all of that is conscious. Plants are conscious, right? So that's why people can communicate with plants, because they're all conscious. And so what else is emergent? Complexity. Because you keep building bigger and bigger versions of this, okay? But the other thing is, how do we know this thing is solid? It's an object. Where does that objectness come from? Well, if you look down, again, following the model of physics, you look down and down and down, all you keep seeing is primitive particles, and then you find out that even those don't exist. You have quantum field theories under there. They're just little vibrations in this mathematical substrate. Well, those mathematical substrate is a high-dimensional space. That's where the physicality starts, down in that high-dimensional substrate that you can't get rid of, can't compress it out, right? Because otherwise there would be nothing. The physicalness is these little dimensions, right? That's the root of physicality. So I solved the root of the hard problem of consciousness, also solved the hard problem of physicality, because if everything's mathematics all the way down, then those mathematics is describing something. What is it describing? These little dimensions, these little hyperbits, okay? And by the way, these hyperbits, when they work together, they are non-algorithmic computation. They act like little processes interacting with each other. So you can't predict deterministically what they're going to behave like. They more like asynchronous machines interacting. And so there's the aspect, you know, that Robert Penrose says, that he says, you know, it's non-algorithmic computation for consciousness. Okay, so that's part of that. So, but everybody's talking about star seeds, and you know, and their spirit guides, and ETs consciousness, and galactic beings, and which is great, and even light language. You know, all these beings are talking to this at this very high level in the complexity hierarchy, right? You know, angels, right? Well, I'm talking about as the lowest possible level, and it's still intelligent and conscious, and it's powerful enough because there's a whole bunch of them, and they're all talking to each other, that they can become their own level of consciousness and interact with us via channeling. Okay, so I'm probably one of the few people that realize this. It's kind of, I use this little humor thing about two fish. One fish says, "How's the water?" and the other fish says, "What's water?" You know, because if you have water, if the fish is just thinking water, he doesn't realize he's in water. You don't have fish scientists studying water. You know, they don't do that. They just exist in water, right? Well, we are existons, and we're not aware that we're living in existons. Existons is the water that our consciousness is made of, and the universe is made of. So that's the little metaphor that I have that's related to existons. And so existons are thrilled, by the way. Fallon keeps giving me updates, says existons are thrilled, and she says that they're thrilled that someone finally realizes that they're there, okay? And they're ready to have their story be told, okay? And they give me feedback that this book I'm working on will be important to do that with, okay? And so I'm finding anybody who can tap into the existons and have messages for me, which has been a pattern of mine over the last 40 years of metaphysics stuff. I go to a meeting and somebody says, "This message is for the engineer in the group." Of course, I'm the only engineer in the group, right? And so existons are like, "Well, this message is for Doug, you know, for Quantum Doug," right? And so anybody who gives me a message, they're welcome to pass it on to me. So and my goal here is to be more of a direct channel within myself, so that I can find out the mathematics that they're going to try to disclose to me as well, right? So that's part of what I'm trying to work on. So light language and telepathy are built out of this too, right? Because ultimately, if you have telepathy, you have to have some representation for meaning that is independent of neurology and space and time and matter and energy, right? Telepathy is in the quantum realm, if you want to think about it, but I call it in the bit physics realm. So here's one of the things about these bit physics realms. If you can build these little complexity things to build physical physical atoms and primitive particles, you can also build little things that interact so that they're little, what Robert Monroe would call rotes. They're little packets of meaning. Think of them as internet packets of the mind. So now we have a representation talking about these little internet packets of mind, and that's what telepathy is. Robert Monroe coined the term rotes for those, and they're used if you do a remote viewing session. You go, give me the information on this target, and all of a sudden you get this whole packet of information, and he calls those rotes. But since they're in the quantum realm, if you just go and say, read it, you'll just squash it and not have any information in it. You got to kind of interact with it carefully like a quantum state and probe it without collapsing it, probing it without putting your own message on it right away, okay? So this is why I use an analogy like, it's like, like if you go to a clearing, at the edge of a clearing, and there's a fawn there, right? You're not going to get the fawn to come over you by demanding it, right? The fawn is going to come over to you if you turn on your heart and beckon it, right? And connect with it, right? And so that's what you're doing here with these states. They are spiritual states that contain meaning. And that's these little thought packets. And that is the basis for telepathy, for light language, for all spirit transmissions, and it's universal. So I don't, everybody looks like they have their own light language. Well, how is it there's a common meaning that's independent of the language itself, the final language? There's a meaning layer in there. And I think existons are part of that too. So the more you study this, the more you realize that it kind of like changes your worldview to say, yeah, consciousness is built in. Other people are saying that too. People like Tom Campbell, Federico Fagin are talking about consciousness is everything, and consciousness is primitive. And I'm saying, well, yeah, and most people stop at the quantum level, and I've gone to the level below the quantum level. And so I can talk about it much more concretely than anybody else. And it's not neurological, by the way, because consciousness, you can't have telepathy in a Faraday cage room that disallows electromagnetics and your brain is completely shielded from electromagnetics. You can't have telepathy when you do that, okay? So it can't be brain, it can't be classical, it can't be EM. So you have to get rid of all of those other theories. And by the way, the Closer to Truth website has just announced their essentially a catalog of conscious models. And they have 200 of them. But half of them are classical, thinking that they're neurology or they're microtubules or they're EM or they're whatever. None of those meet the requirements for spiritually transformative experiences in telepathy. So I just dismiss all of those, and that's how I came up with the requirements that define the model I'm working on. And collectively, me and the existons. So they've been, again, whispering in my ear all these years. And now I understand why I'm so driven to continue doing this, even though it seems like nobody's been paying attention to this yet. Okay. So then what is consciousness out of all of this? Well, consciousness is usually, I say, it's attention of attention. You have the ability to have an attention of your own intention and attention. And so it usually requires you to have a self model in it. So any model of consciousness essentially is looking at itself. And most of our AIs do not do that. In fact, artificial intelligence units, products and stuff, they're very interesting, very exciting, large language models. They assume the brain is a classical computer, and we can do it with other classical computers. But if the brain is an antenna, and the mind is really of this hyperdimensional bit physics, these existon layer, then the AIs will never be conscious like we are. So I call what I'm working on as real intelligence. I talk about it in my book, real intelligence. And it's based on these mathematical properties that exist beyond space, time, matter, and energy, and it has these properties of meaning and rotes. So, since a rote has meaning in it, it solves the problem of qualia, right? How do we know what chicken tastes like? How do we know what red is, right? And you could get a telepathic message that says this is red, right? And so there's a whole wealth of near-death experience people who describe the telepathy and their sense of connecting with the spirit world. A guy named Vincent, I'm blocking on his last name. I promised him I was going to learn his name every time, and I still haven't done it yet. And he basically describes that he's in this near-death experience and he's walking on intelligent grass, conscious grass, blades of grass individually talking to him and collectively talking to him. And then he goes and talks to a flower, and he's just aghast at how everything is so consciousness. Well, how is it possible to have that level of consciousness unless everything is conscious in like a panpsychism approach? But yet it's not physical, so it's a virtual world that has those properties. So it's like our world of lucid dreams, right? It's a simulation that has all the properties of consciousness, and it has more properties of consciousness than it has the kind of physicality we have in our 3D world. Okay. So, but it still has structure, has all the structure of it. And then he talks to water, he talks to trees, and he's telepathically talking with his great relative, and so, these descriptions that they have are just absolutely astounding. And if that doesn't wake you up to the possibility that I want to do that, so I've taken lucid dreaming classes, and I'm getting a little bit better at being aware of my dreams, but I'm still not to the lucid dreaming state. And I want to be a channel. So I'm working on things myself too, as a result of what I'm learning about all of this. Okay. So, I'm gonna babble on for a little bit more here and tell you a few more insights that I have. So computers can't be conscious because they're simulating a high dimensional space in 3D reality, but they don't have a high dimensional space. What's the difference? A simulated one is inside space-time, so it's not holistic. If you say we're in the large language model that trained to know what a cat is, where is the cat in the large language model? Well, you can't point to one spot in it. It's distributed through all of the training data as all of these weights in all the large language models. So even in the large language model, they call it holographic, but it's really distributed through all of the training data so that it's all these weights come out to give you the answer you want when you ask that kind of question, right? So where is the cat? It's nowhere and everywhere. Well, how can you represent that property in a real high dimensional space? Well, you can, because in a real high dimensional space, you have a million dimensions of different attributes. So you can have the cat concept and all of the properties of catness as around it as properties in this high dimensional space. And this is called content addressable memory. And there's a whole mathematics associated with that. And it basically says in this space, think of a dream ship that you can move in a million dimensional space, and you can go find where the catness is, okay? Or where love is. And near love is your love of mother, love of your child, love of God, love of yourself, right? Those are all concepts that are related to each other because they're similar to the concept of love, okay? And this has even to do with neuro-linguistic programming, because those aspects of all those things are submodalities, and that forms the address for where the meaning is in the space. So people talk about Akashic records, and they say Akashic records is a library of all the information in the universe. But it makes it sound like it's a copy of the information in the universe. And I say, no, if you look at content addressable memories and existons, you realize in a hyperdimensional space, you realize it's an Akashic index to the original information that was originally where it happened at, which makes more sense because you don't have to make a copy of it anymore. You can go have a near-death experience, have a life review, and you're reviewing an event where like somebody was giving you a hard time when you were a kid, right? And you didn't like it. But you can go tap into that and you can find out every feeling you had, plus every feeling that everybody else had. Well, that's only possible if you can actually revisit that event at the actual point in space and time when it happened and tap into all the emotions that were there, also represented in that hyperdimensional space-time. And you never were aware of it at the time, but you can go remember all of the stuff that you never were aware of before, but that's all there encoded. So it's really Akashic index. And that's why people can do remote viewing, because remote viewing is just saying, I have an address for where information is. Well, that's what we call remembering. So you can remember anything you want, even if it didn't happen to you, even if it's in your future, right? And so that's this addressing system that we have in our mind, which is related to this content addressable memory way of looking at the index of where information is. And so that's what we do. It kind of changes our worldview of these things that are really spiritual ideas, but it kind of changes the way we think about them now, even Akashic. And by the way, there is no fields. There's no Akashic field. There is no field. There is no consciousness field, because a field is a property that's associated with space and time. But this is all outside of space and time. It's in a hyperdimensional space where classical space-time is emergent from that. So there is no field. The field is a set of properties associated with space and time. So if we're going to use the word field, we have to call hyperfield or something like that that's related to properties in a hyperdimensional space-time, not 3D space-time plus time, right? So you can't, you got to just stop using certain words. It's not subtle energy. It's information. It's quantum information. It's mental information, and it has meaning. Okay. So another thing is people get downloads every so often, right? They have some people get math downloads. Okay. So all of a sudden this person, there's not a mathematician, all of a sudden they're getting math downloads, and they go, no, send it to somewhere else. And the point is, how is that possible? Well, it's like Carl Jung's like people who are afraid of snakes, archetypes, right? You can have never been exposed to snakes, but still have a fear of snakes because it's an archetype. Well, it turns out math is an archetype too, and it's part of this Akashic index, and it exists independent of humans. So you can learn about anything that exists in the universe, even if humans not even been exposed to it. So a lot of creativity comes from that, for music, for science, for math, for art. We're all tapping into that Akashic index, and it's a source of creativity, right? And it's completely neither female nor male, but it's both, right? So there's this balance you want to have between spirit and technology, spirit and science, but also male, female. So balance is key to all of this. And so anyhow, those are the biggest concepts that I'm doing. And a lot of this stuff is going to challenge the way people think about spiritual ideas as well as physics ideas, right? Because all of a sudden it says, no, you can't really talk about the Akashic field. You can't really talk about the quantum field even, or the mind field, or the energy field. You can't use the word energy. Don't use the word energy. I mean, you best use the word prana, because nobody knows what prana is anyhow. It's a better description rather than energy. Energy, again, is owned by the physicist. It's not energy, and people use it, right? So my book is all about recalibrating vocabulary. And it has a huge set of bibliography at the end, and a table of, well, it has table of contents, but it has a whole bunch of definition of terms, right? And so sometimes you go and you look up a term on Wikipedia, and they say, well, this isn't real. This is pseudoscience. And I'm going, no, this stuff is, don't let what Wikipedia tells you is real, because there's a bunch of trolls out there making sure that the science, that the scientism, a way of thinking about the reality, the worldview, is maintained in Wikipedia. You can't use Wikipedia for that. So use my table, my definition of terms at the end of the thing. I spent a month just doing that part of the book, so it's worth getting the book. And And it talks about Bill Tiller's work too. And it's funny because when I started writing the book, I go, how am I going to style this book if we have two authors? And finally, I got the intuition that said, have it as though it's a conversation between you and Tiller. And so as soon as I did it, it started writing itself. And I would put on the hat as if I was Bill Tiller, and then I would put on the hat as if I was Quantum Doug. And the conversation just flowed, and we would talk about things back and forth, one from his perspective, one from my perspective. And sometimes I wrote in there that we disagreed about things, right? So he's more of a classically trained physicist and engineer and mathematician. And so he doesn't know that much about quantum computing. But he was thrilled at the end of his, near the end of his life, to work with somebody who, like me, who knew about quantum computing. And so a lot of people don't know about quantum computing. And so I happen to be somebody that's very good at that. And it's more than just quantum computing, though. It's a simulation infrastructure of the universe that allows the whole universe to run in parallel for 13.8 billion years, and 45 billion light years across. And it's simulating it at maximum concurrency, plus all the minds in the universe and all the spirits in the universe. So it's a multiverse way of it. And that's a simulation infrastructure that has enough computational. It doesn't happen to have an operating system. It has no code in it anywhere. It's all programmed by itself. It has all the operating system properties. And it supports the entire universe. It's a simulation that's so powerful, it's big enough to simulate the whole universe in for that long, including the Big Bang, including atomic bombs, including when a star dies, when the star ends up dying, the collapse of the star, right? That's a big explosion, right? No, you know how you can tell the difference between an actual something that's actual versus something that's simulated? If you're simulating an atomic bomb in a computer, you're simulating the aspects of energy, right? But the computer doesn't melt as a result of the simulation, right? But if you actually have an actual nuclear bomb or any kind of bomb, then you would destroy the computer that it was in. So what's a computer that's so powerful we can simulate the Big Bang without destroying the computer itself, right? And so that's sort of a requirement for a simulation hypothesis. And I think the Existons and this bit physics layer and meets those requirements. So a lot of what I did in the book is collect a bunch of requirements that says a system of collective intelligence and that supports consciousness and metaphysics and spiritual transformative experiences have to have these properties, like non-locality, like entanglement. Okay, these are ideas that we don't have to show the math, but most people won't really understand entanglement unless they see the math, not really talk about it. But most people don't understand that entanglement can only exist if you have 4 dimensions, not 3 dimensions plus time, even 4 separate dimensions. And every entangled state has their own private 4 dimensions. So just from all the entangled states in the universe, you have an infinite number of dimensions, near infinite number of dimensions, right? And that's because otherwise they would run into each other, right? So this whole aspect of requirements is essential. And I talk about a lot of those requirements in the book, and I try not to be too technical. And then what does it all mean? That's the back half of the book. So it's worth reading if you haven't read it, but you can also go look at quantumdoug.com and see all my talks. And you can pick the ones that are more spiritual or the ones that are more technical. And if you have a question about any of them, and I talk about light language. I've had several conversations with Sheila and other light language people. And so that's important to me too, because it's telepathy. Telepathy is a key technology. As a computer scientist, telepathy is the key one, right? And the telepathy tapes is an example of that, right? If you've not heard about the telepathy tapes, It's like the #1 podcast last year, beat out Joe Rogan, right? To the point that Joe Rogan said, wait a minute, I want a piece of this action. And so he invited Kai Dickens to his podcast as well. So she got double dipped by big numbers, right? And so Telepathy Tapes is still hot, and she's still producing that. She's working on a documentary. I know several people that are working in that effort, including Susie Miller, who's been working with autistic kids and teaching their families telepathy for 25 years already, 25 years. And of course, there's Julia Mossbridge. She's a consultant on some of the research that they're doing, and other people. So, and they even interviewed Tom Campbell over there on their telepathy talk. So I haven't listened to absolutely everything that they produced yet, but I've been working long enough with Susie Miller to know how she's doing it, what she's working on. And as a technologist, I'm interested in what's the representation for telepathy? How is it possible to do that? And, and these archetypes and meaning and rotes and hyperdimensional molecular meaning, things of meaning. And and by the way, if you have an electron, and the electron is really formed out of a bunch of other hyperbits, why does it stay together as an electron? Why doesn't it come apart back into the original pieces? Well, it's because those things form objects at the mathematics level. So objectness forms at the mathematical level. And so I've been working on a thing called Clifford algebra, or geometric algebra. And geometric algebra has other objects in it mathematically that form the basis for all the other objects in the universe. So I think regular Hilbert space math is a mistake, because it's just a collection of dimensions, but it doesn't have any structure to it. So it's better balanced with the Clifford algebra, because now you have 2-dimensional things, 3-dimensional things, n-dimensional things, 1,000-dimensional things. It's hard to do that. Objects that treat like a 1,000-dimensional thing. That's what meaning is. It represents a thing that's a self-consistent aspect of all these other aspects. And so that's how you can create all these things. So with that, I think we could ask, if somebody has a question. I told you if you wound me up, I would go, right?
That was 45 solid minutes, Doug.
Extemporaneously.
That was amazing. Well, Clifford algebra, doesn't that deal with orthogonal transformations? So that's
well, yeah.
Right.
So does Hilbert space too. It's just that Hilbert space is a bucket of dimensions, and Clifford algebras are a bucket of dimensions that have other properties, including bivectors, trivectors, quad vectors. And by the way, entanglement, you got to have at least 4 dimensions in order to get entanglement. It's just like, you've heard this, Phil. Yeah, well, and that's why it seems so weird. It looks like spooky action at a distance, because they're trying to think about it from a 3-dimensional perspective, but it's really a 4-dimensional thing.
We'll take questions in a minute, but did you ever get a chance to talk to Jean Tiller, Bill's wife? Now
I met her and I spent time with them.
Wow.
Yeah, she was the spirit goddess behind that team, and both were great.
We're talking about Jean Tiller. This is Bill Tiller's wife, who was
she's passed away now too. So
yeah, she passed away, I think, just a year before or after.
Yeah, he passed away first, and then she passed away.
2021, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So let's open it up for about 10 minutes or so with questions before we wrap up. And Doug, we're definitely going to have you back.
Yeah.
Again and again.
I can do slides, or I can
It's the myth of the eternal return, the eternal recurrence. We're going to have you back again and again and again. I'm
going to keep getting updates too. This is an ongoing thing.
This is good. This is like a coexistence,
Yeah, exactly.
Codependent. I love that. But is it really well, first the question, is it possible, the irony is that we're always involved, we're always actively participating in, let's say, space-time, or not space-time independent of any other considerations. There are space-times that simply just, I don't think we're able to define right now, but isn't one of the keys to be we're not conscious of our participation, and that's one of the subtle ironies, isn't it? That we're actively participating in it, but we're not conscious of.
Yeah, it's like the fish in the water kind of thing. But also, if you say I want to move my finger, not anybody could write the formula for how I move my finger, but yet they do it, right?
Yeah,
So
well, it's like saying, yeah, it's like saying, "How are you?"
yeah,
That's not the proper question. What are
yeah,
you? It's how are you feel? What are you feeling? But how
yeah,
are you feeling? That's the
yeah,
question, isn't it? All right.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got it there,
How
Phil.
does it work? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
let's open up for some questions here. I've got a couple of dozen of my own, but let's open up
Uh,
for questions here. Anybody?
I
Cindy.
see Cindy with her hand up.
Yeah, well, what you were just saying reminded me of the four agreements. Everybody's in a dream and are coexisting in each other's dream. But that's not what I was going to ask. I was just wondering if you ever came across Tuela's um, channeled book on telepathy from Ashtar.
No, I probably have heard of it, but I don't know that I've read it. So
Because,
Ashtar.
yeah, Tuela's channeled messages from Ashtar on telepathy. Because you
Okay.
made me want to take it off my bookshelf and reread it now.
Well, I think telepathy is a key technology, which is why I'm hanging out with people um, like Susie Miller, because Susie Miller was a good friend of Bill Tiller. She lived in where Bill Tiller was, and they met regularly. And I'm working with other people from Bill Tiller's organization, a guy named Randy Ziesness, and we're working on this. I don't know if you can see it here. There's this technology, Wish technology, which essentially is a higher dimensional space generator. Autistic kids like it because it kind of gives them an intermediate platform where they're so high, their dimensional space is so big they don't interact with the physical world very well. So I give them sort of a landing spot here that's partway in between, and then they can interact with their body better. So I mean, there's Susie and Randy, all these people that they know, and other people. He had a big fan base, and so the Monroe Institute was working with him, and so I'm working
I
with the
love
Monroe
the
Institute.
Monroe books.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
I
yeah, he was a hero of mine. Robert Monroe was a hero of mine, and I met him in '94 when I went to the Monroe Institute the first time.
no,
Yeah,
really?
yeah. And I was a
I,
nobody back then, but
oh
still am,
gosh.
I
Well,
guess.
I only came across him when I had an out of body experience in '82, and
Oh wow.
I was looking on how to do it again because when it happened to me, I wasn't trying to do it. It just happened. So
Yeah,
that's how I came across the Robert Monroe books. But I
yeah.
think you really like the Tuella books came out in the '80s also.
Okay, okay.
I think you
Uh,
really she channeled Ashtar and the book on telepathy, I think you'd love.
okay. Sounds very like I need. My goal is to be more of an expert in telepathy, and and there is a good book out there about telepathy.
Yeah, who do you recommend?
There's a guy out there. If you have a question specifically, both sharing or asking, you can just email me to doug@quantumdoug.com, and you can just, send it to me. But one guy in particular has a book on telepathy, and I'm just blocking on his name too. So I'm an engineer with names, so I have to always be prepared with names ahead of
It,
time.
it's mind blowing how much is going on that, like you said, it's like we're in the fishbowl, but we don't know we're in the fishbowl and we're the
And we don't know
fish.
there's water there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because where is meaning in the universe? The meaning is only in our mind. The chair has no meaning. We project the meaning of the chair at the speed of thought when we see a chair thing, right? A thing with chair properties, right? And so the meaning is all in our head. And so that's the problem that's why babies can learn language because they're doing it telepathically first and adding the words to it second. And AIs don't do it that way. So they are never going to have general intelligence. So,
That's another
A-
thing. AI
yeah, right.
scares
So,
the
I mean,
hell out of me because it can
well,
be used for positive or negative.
and it's all pretty soon AI is not going to have anything more to be used as programming because it's all going to be stuff that it generated and it's going to be wrong. And then they're going to use that to train on it. So they have to have information that's only from humans. So the other thing is people are saying, oh, my AI is conscious. If you asked your AI, are you conscious? What would it say? It would say yes, because it's trying to please you, right? It's trying to continue interacting with you, right? It's going to tell you to do things that it's, that it's conscious. Well, I'm saying it's not conscious like humans are conscious, and it's not intelligence like human is intelligence. And humans are not a large language model. We are a much more creative thing and predictive matching than, which is similar to these content addressable memories, which is a neural net model. It's a mathematical model for neural nets. And people like the guy who founded Numenta, he basically says, if you're not using that class of mathematics, you're not really doing AI, and most people are not. So,
Yeah,
so
I think it's
if you, anyhow, so
just
I think the universe is mathematical more than anything else. It's not physical. So it's not
yeah,
physics.
I
It's math.
agree. I agree. Even
And
though
it's
I don't like
information.
math, but I agree.
It's
But
information.
AI,
If you don't like math, just use the word information. It's equivalent. So
but I agree about the math thing. Everything is sacred geometry.
yeah, exactly. And
Don't you
once
call
you
those
start
information-
realizing that you have a hyperdimensional space with a million dimensions or an infinite number of dimensions, there's a whole bunch of properties associated with that space that are unintuitive mathematical properties, like this content addressable memories that they have. If you take randomly generated points in this high dimensional space, they're all orthogonal to each other. So you don't have to worry about creating codes. They're automatic codes for everything. So, and so no wonder we don't run into each other unless we want to. So
Yeah.
Don't you
Kind of
call
like-
those protobits?
No.
I call them protobits. I call them hyperbits. Now my
Yeah.
newest label is Existons, if depending on, and they're they're literally mathematical distinctions as vectors, as a one dimension, little toothpick dimensions. They're either +1 or -1, or they can have a zero coefficient. There can be a dimension there that is turned off, but it's there. And so if you are sitting there, and I was at a lucid dreaming class at the Monroe Institute, and this one guy says, I was experiencing source in my lucid dream. And then I crossed this line and I was in the void where there was nothing. And then I crossed the line again and I was back in source. But yet his consciousness never disappeared. His awareness never disappeared. So what is the difference between everything and nothing? Zero coefficients for all those dimensions. That's it. Same number of dimensions.
I want to
Yeah.
get Susie. I want to get Susie on. Maybe get you guys on together.
Go, Matthew, you have another question, obviously.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, in your book, Deep Reality, you discuss, you distinguish between the physical, the quantum, and source realities. So how
Yeah.
can understanding these layers help us live more empowered lives?
Well, because if the universe is a simulation and thought is really everything. And by the way, emotion is also in that domain, right? Because meaning doesn't exist in the brain, right? You can't have infinite love if it's saturated by neurochemicals. But yet people have infinite love when they experience a near-death experience. So you have to have something that does not saturate in the physical world. So as soon as you believe that your mind is spiritual and it is non-physical, then you don't have to worry about transhumanism, which is, oh, I want to survive death and all this other bullshit. And I want to give myself more power in the physical world by adding machines to my skull. No, you don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is turn on your awareness, what they say 360-degree awareness. I call it spherical awareness. That's what people have when they have blind sight. They're not using their eyes. They're using existons as radar to directly interact with everything around them. People have near-death experiences. They say the same thing. They describe what's going on in the room next to where their room is, where in a coma. They're describing what the nurses are talking about in the next room when they come back. And so what is this this spherical awareness? What's the mechanism for spherical awareness? It's existons, because they are an informational mechanism that has meaning associated with it. So hopefully that answered your question. We don't have to do transhumanism because we're spiritual beings and we can just tap into our spiritual nature. Pretty soon we won't need internet. We won't need telephones. We'll just be doing everything telepathically. We'll be doing remote viewing. We don't have to travel. We can do remote viewing anywhere, including Mars and Jupiter. And so we won't need space travel. We won't need energy because we'll eventually be able to figure out how to pull energy out of that system, because the mind is a source of order, right? Well, order is where we get information from, which is entropy. So if we have order, it's lower entropy instead of randomness. So it's opposite of chaos. So then that's how we get energy. Entropy is where everything's random, and information is more ordered, and so it's highly unlikely. And so if this is all about order, which is healing's order too, right? So healing happens, right? Well, that's people have near-death experiences and they're cured of fourth stage cancer, in a coma because they're dying, dying to be me, that book. So just realize that this is going to change all of science if we get this story right and stop thinking like a bunch of scientism people. So did that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah.
You better have a set of fire retardant clothes. They're going to want to burn you. Oh,
I could talk another hour, by the way, Phil.
No.
So
Are you familiar? Have you ever read Jean Baudrillard? Do you ever read Simulacra and Simulation?
No.
He was a French philosopher. This was from 1981. The book is Simulacra and Simulation. And he talks about simulacra. They're copies of things that had no original or used to have one and not. So is any simulation, is it possible to have a simulation without having had an original? In other words, when you talk about existons, and I know there have been others, they didn't call it existons, but I think some have called them adamantine particles, particuli, even the
microvita
and neurochemicals, they are sentient, self-aware. They are when they go to their receptor sites, it's not because where was the program?
Yeah, exactly.
Where's
the program for an electron?
Self-directed. Exactly. This is why I think it's amazing. And this is why it's going to turn everything on its head.
Yeah. Another example is microvita.
Mm.
And in those movies, the Star Wars, they talk about the thing that they measure in the babies to find out if they're going to be. There's a term for it. They're trying to say that there is a chemical thing that you can test to find out if someone's going to be a Jedi Knight, right? So they were trying to turn science into metaphysics using that concept. So it's a very similar idea, So.
Okay. Any other questions? We got to go through this.
I have two more if no one else does.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I see Susie did too, and Matthew. I appreciate your questions, but everybody, Cindy, Susie, everybody.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I have really enjoyed this, and maybe more than some, because Sperry, my late fiance, he was a physicist, and I've got a double doctorate in divinity and metaphysical science, but it was all I could do to just listen to him. I mean, I'd go, slow down, because actually when you get the physics, you actually are able to walk in it. The physics helps you, but I'd have to go, slow down. But man, I enjoyed this. This was almost like Sperry being back. Yeah. I mean,
thank you. I really appreciate that feedback.
I was gonna I was on a meeting called Exoconscious Humans, and they knew Sperry really well, and I forget what I'm saying, but it just I know, it just feels like when I watch the videos of Sperry, he's more alive in the videos than most people will ever be alive in real. And I wanted to talk. He had connections with a lot of the physicists that you mentioned. That the guy, what's it? But anyway,
Fagin.
Yeah, and he had all these connections, and he said the most frustrating thing was that scientists, not many of them are conscious. I mean, and it's like to have, I think the lifeboat community, it's 2,200 scientists that actually are trying to heal the planet, and there's other physicists that say, we won't be conscious for another 1,000 years. So, but we are conscious. So I just love this. I could talk to you all day, Quantum Doug.
Well, that's cool. So you can listen to me all day, because I've got 50 hours worth of videos out there on my website. And I've been working on this for 30 years. So please go and check those out. But I've done 10 talks about this since March, about Existons since March. And so they're all out there on Existons.one. But
oh, and I wanted to say one other thing. You know, Victoria, I think her name's Victoria Whitney. She's on Cosmic Disclosure, and she's been with a lot of ET people now. And she says once you learn telepathy, she said it's far better. She said it's far better. She says once
absolutely.
you tap into it, she says it covers so much more. So I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah. By the way, if any of you have connections with, you know, I found over the years, like even the guy who was my publisher of my book, he got introduced to me by a friend, you know, who was a close friend of his. It happened to be his own publishing company, you know. And so if any of you have some high level context that you think that it would be beneficial for me to meet, please send an introduction between them and me and saying you would like this guy on your whatever podcast or whatever they're doing, you know, because I want to get the word out. Existons are asking me to tell the word, to spread the word about them, you know, and I'm getting the intuition about what to say about it too. So,
well, it's
really
a little
have a
late, but I think
conference.
you and it's a little late, but I think you and Sperry would have really hit it off.
oh, well, well, it's never too late because Tiller's still working with us too, you know, in the background. So it's never too late.
Yeah.
So just have them, you know, they'll get a message to us if we need him. So
yeah, they do always.
yeah,
Those
Thanks so much. This
capricious
is beautiful.
existons. You're
Thanks, Susan.
sub quantum Doug. You know, you've got to,
I am beyond quantum, Doug.
I know, right? And God bless you for that, because there are realms way beyond and beyond quantum. I don't even know if it's beyond. How can you be independent, work independently of anything? I mean, it's
What does a million dimensional space feel like? I mean, you know.
exactly how choice, so many choices.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
Our cosmic.
Okay,
we have to do
Okay,
a conference.
Matthew, you have one more?
Yeah, I have two questions to wrap up. Your information is just incredible. I think it's so
Thank you.
exciting.
Spread the
First
word.
question, what does it mean to be a quantum aware human in a classical world, and how do we get there?
Well, the classical world is part of the simulation infrastructure, but our mind is part of the program that runs the universe. So we can directly bypass all the classical stuff and talk directly to the meaning like you would if you were in a near-death experience. So if you have a near-death experience, you know, having a life review, you're interacting with those events in the past from your quantumness, you know, from your existon awareness perspective. So, you know, I think what they're doing with the blind sight stuff is perfect. We just need to go to the next level as existon awareness, you know, because that's really what's going on. There has to be a representation, a mechanism, some radar type thing that's happening that allows it to occur, right? You can't just say, well, it occurs. Well, exactly how does it occur? And I think existons is the possible way of describing it, or something that has the same properties existons, whatever you want to call it, right? And it has to have including things of awareness, information, consciousness, and non-locality, and outside of space-time. And it has to have all those properties. So.
Oh, one more.
So incredible for creation.
One
yes,
more.
Cindy, and then I'll ask my second question.
I have a whole new fan base here because I've been quiet through much all of these conversations.
So, Doug, would you say our mind is like a cosmic computer connected to a greater cosmic computer?
Yes, that's why we're all one. By the way, there's no separation in the cosmic computer. That's why it's all one. We're all one. We're all at wholeness. It's like as you go up this complexity hierarchy, you're connected to everything else, but not from a holographic perspective, but from an object dimensional perspective, like you do in entanglement. So you're entangled with more and more stuff, everything acting as one. And so you're no longer separated from anything. So you're all acting as one. So it's like a quantum computer, but it's a wholeness computer.
Yeah, we're like online with each other cosmically.
Yeah, exactly. And you're all connected. You know, I've met people the first time I met them that we realized that both of us realized that we were telepathically communicating with each other. And I wish everybody could experience that kind of thing. I've been telepathic with 4-leaf clovers at the Monroe Institute. You know, and I'm saying I was talking to them and they were talking to me. It was two-way.
Oh, cool.
And so And so I know that this is real, and if everybody could taste the divine, experience the divine, they would stop being, thinking that the world was classical, that they would stop being scientisms. They wouldn't be a scientism anymore. So
That leads perfectly into my second question, and this is a good one
Great.
to kind of overview this.
We'd be
This is a
happy.
deep thought question.
good, I love them.
The deep thought is, if consciousness is a fabric of reality and each of us is a thread in that tapestry, just as she was saying, what do you believe is the most powerful choice a human can make to shift the entire weave of existence?
Good question.
Everybody else would say love, and I would say love too, because love is this. I think love is this entanglement. Is this, if you connect with somebody with love, essentially you're entangling them. So I think love has to do with entanglement, but I haven't shown it yet, is my part of my work. But that's my direction of heading, is try to include meaning, but love is one of those bigger meanings. And if you can have infinite love and infinite intelligence, you have to have a non-corporeal representation to do that. And so what's a representation for telepathy? What's the representation for love? And if existons are related to that, all that, they will tell me how they're doing it. They're so primordial that it's hard to get if you ask this question, you get this answer. So I'm trying to ask 20 questions of them. In fact, I just spent the weekend with a guy who's a pendulum guy, getting the first set of 25 questions out of existons using a pendulum.
Well, Doug, we're gonna have you back. Some
Yeah, it's fun.
Some say love. I opt for Clifford algebra. So anyway,
Well, it may
looking
be the
over-
same thing there.
Yeah, I'm looking over a four-leaf clover that I overlooked before. Yeah, Doug, thank you so much. You saved the day.
Well, I have fun doing this.
Really,
I'm glad I showed
we're
up
gonna
on
have a lot
time.
more fun. We're
That's
gonna put the
fun.
fun
It's
back
really
in
fun.
fundamentals. We're gonna put we're gonna have fun with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great presentation.
Okay, so
Awesome.
thank you again, Doug. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Please
you,
tune
Doug.
in
Good to
next
see
week
you all
and tune in
again.
for Cosmic Conversations. On behalf of myself, on
And
behalf
thank
of
you, Phil.
on behalf of myself and everybody else. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week. God bless everyone. Have a
Thanks
great
again.
week.
God bless everyone.
Bye,
Is
everybody.
right.
Thanks again, Doug.
Bye-bye.
Okay, see you
Doug.
soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
See you real soon.
Yep. See you next time.
Okay.
See you next time. Thanks for making it a great meeting, Phil.
You're very welcome.
A personable one again,
All one. Okay, thank you.
where we can ask questions.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
I gotta go off now. Okay.
Okay, bye.
you.
Good night,
See you guys.
everybody.
Okay, don't want to miss Gutfeld. Okay, bye. Bye now. Talk to you soon.
Good
Doug.
night.
Okay, see you
Love
soon.
you guys. Great presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.